Plugin of the week is the Waves Bass Rider plugin. The Waves Bass Rider plugin is a plugin that's designed to work specifically with basses and leveling out the imbalances of between notes and of notes within a bass performance. Now, it's sort of a sister plugin, if you will, to the Vocal Rider, which is specifically designed for working with vocals. So the characteristic design of this plugin is to work with the bass to help bring out or make consistent or even more of the notes. Now, I actually have I've worked with this a fair amount, and sometimes I really love the results and sometimes I really hate the results. So it's not like I'm just going to give every plugin like an amazing, review on it. The one thing I will say about this is that you do have to be careful with the range and the way that you work with it. You may have to automate certain settings like the response time or the sensitivity based on section to section and what is actually being performed. But overall, it's a really quite powerful plugin. So let's go over the individual features. The first feature is the target. You can think of the target as like a threshold setting. So this is like a central point for which the activity of writing bass notes happens. Okay, so in other words, effectively, what happens? It's sort of like a compressor expander in a way, where when signals go above a certain threshold, it pulls the notes down and compresses them, and when they go below a certain threshold, it expands them upward. And so you can adjust those parameters there, and this sort of sets a central point from which that activity takes place. Now, over here in the detect section, you have a sensitivity control. The sensitivity control determines how responsive it is to the particular performance. So, for example, if you set the sensitivity to a low setting, it will respond less or respond to less notes. If you set it to a high setting, it will take and respond to more actively or interactively with the sound. The response also has a slow or a fast characteristic, and this would be sort of the equivalent of an attack time on a compressor. So is it going to respond very quickly, or actually more of a recovery setting? So is it going to recover faster to get to the next note, or is it going to be a little bit smoother? So here's one where I talk about automating it. So if you had a lot of sustained notes in one section, then it goes into this thing where it's ripping off 16th notes, you would automate the fast setting for that 16th note section so the detail of all those individual notes comes out. But it'll be a little bit more responsive to slower notes or more sustained notes with the slower setting. The spill is specifically designed for working with mics on a bass amp where there may be bleed from other instruments into that bass mic that may cause the Bass Rider plugin to respond. So if you have a lot of bleed, say from drums, you would flip the setting up here to high. So it's weird to look at the circle because I'm dragging up and down, which is just changing the knob here. So when I set it to low, there's no bleed or a minimum of bleed. And therefore it's not responding to any of it. But here, if there's a lot of bleed, I can make it less sensitive to the artifacts or other things. So I can set it anywhere in between and then adjust it accordingly. Now, there is also artifacts, and this is different from spill, because spill is like other instruments or things that would not be sort of inherent in a bass sound. So the artifacts are specific to parts of a bass note or a bass sound that are not necessarily the musical elements. The pick hitting the string, the squeak or squeal when if you have round wound strings or round wound strings and the bass player is sliding from note to note, squeaks, things like that that might happen intermittently throughout a performance, and those types of things it will you can decide or determine like how much of them. So if there's a lot of those artifacts, you switch it towards high, and the Bass Rider will not respond to them. So, and if there's less or none of them, then you set it to low. So the reason why you do this, or why you have this particular setting here, is that if you have like a low squeal, you don't want the Bass Rider trying to push that note way up. So if you find that it is taking those intermittent or weird noises that might be between notes, you don't want it raising the gain up of that, trying to bring that up. Because the idea of the plugin is that it's trying to even out the overall gain of the ends of the sustains of notes, the transitions between notes. It's taking the notes that are sticking out way too much and kind of pulling them back. And that's effectively working with those types of things. Now, you have a rider fader in the middle. So this is not something that you adjust. So if you drag it, it'll just snap right back to here, this sort of target area. So this is where it's going to snap back to. So I could have this set, for example, to -6, and when it's not active, it acts like a gate and sort of just snaps down to that particular area. So I can set it to do that. And by default, it just sort of is set at a 0 setting here. The range from the top determines how high it will go up, like how much gain, what's the maximum amount of gain it will add for low notes. And the lower slider sets the minimum amount of gain that it will react to. So from here, effectively what I can do is I can set this so that, let's set it to -5, I meant to set it to -6. Effectively what I can do with this is I can say, never give me more than 6 dB of boost or more than 6 dB of attenuation. And therefore you're setting sort of a range from which the bass rider will act. And then, of course, if you're adding gain, you may find, or taking away gain, you may have to make that up with the output level. Okay, so it's pretty cool. Unlike the Vocal Rider plugin, it doesn't have a whole automation section. Now, for me, I never really particularly rode basses like this for my mixes. I spent a little bit more time with compression and limiting, particularly in the recording process. And in the analog days, a lot of that would even out by the level that you would record it onto the analog tape, which was a real classic form of compression. But there were a lot of people who would take and they would ride bass notes. And for particular songs where the bass is a very, very important part of the pulse or the rhythm of the song, that consistency in the bass sound, especially like, on like a disco track or something where it's like a rock track where the bass is really like thumping and really kind of driving the track, that consistency of the level is really important part of making the performance like really powerful. So let's get onto a little bit of audio examples. And let's start with a little bit of just solo bass so we can kind of hear what's going on. So here I'm going to start by setting the range control. So if I set it up here, it's going to try to pull things up to here. So in a way, like when I say it's a threshold, it's really more of a range that it's kind of going to. If I set it lower, it's going to try to pull notes downward. So I'm trying to find it, if you see that level kind of riding there in the middle, I'm trying to find a central area where I'm kind of more or less getting some boost and some attenuation. Okay, so now I kind of got like a little bit of a central point here, and now I can set some of the other settings. So right now it's set with a sort of standard sensitivity. So I'm going to increase the sensitivity, and you can see that it's responding more and more consistently. Whereas if I slow it down, you see it's responding to less notes. So you can hear how that difference in there really makes it kind of pump in and out. You can see those gain things that going on in the in-between sections. And it's pumping those areas that are in between your notes. So let me switch the responsiveness to fast. So you can hear how that even makes it more responsive yet. So just to hear what the difference is, let's hear it with and without. time. I know what I can do. I can just go back a little bit farther. So you can hear how it really opens up the sound of the drum. There's no sidechain capabilities for this, so this is not going to respond to an external kick drum feed or anything like that. It pretty much works within these basic settings here. And now let's just hear what the difference is when we mix this in with the track. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch it back to the slower setting. And I think we'll find a nicer medium. I think the fast was a little bit too responsive, cutting down on the sustain. Now it sits in a really, really nice place in there where you feel the pulse of it, you get enough of the sustain of the note, and you get a good pumping thing in there. And those in-between areas, that air kind of pops out. This is where the range is really critical. If you find that there are certain things that stick out way too much, you either need to increase the artifacts area or pull down the upper range so that you can offset. Like if I set the upper range to 3, it'll never give me more than 3 dB of gain output, and I can then offset the target or the resting area where it lands back in the end, so it can give me as much as 6 dB of gain downward, but will never give me more than 3 dB of gain upward. So if you find that certain notes stick out too much, or maybe it snaps up too far for those sections that are in between notes, you could sort of set a cap on it, and a limit on it, which is very, very cool. And so it's a very cool plugin. When you work it, it really allows you to kind of dig out the pulse of a bass. I think it really is very effective with all kinds of musical styles. It works particularly well in this type of thing where it's kind of just pumping and moving along here like at a kind of eighth note pace at a higher tempo. But as you go to slower tempos, you will just kind of find that your sensitivity, response settings, and the way that you set it up is going to kind of make it be a little bit slower and a little bit smoother in terms of the way that it transitions, particularly the sustains of notes. Very powerful one. Really, really cool plugin. Doesn't always work, but no plugin works all the time anyway. So it's one that you have to play with a bit, but it's a really good one. All right, there you have it. Bass Rider plugin by Waves.